racing action before we start our video. Enjoy.
That's the problem with heavy maintenance engines.
Yeah, it's a filthy side.
What size are those fucking nuts? I got a 3/8 in those. Nice fire right there. Oh, the Sean Park.
It's
Is all the set for this weekend. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's 8.
So Mark Smith is going to come back to take on Dan DeGata. Limited 235 final against the #1 qualifier, Dan DeGata. DeGata's 66 Mustang. All finalists, we need you back to the staging lanes, please. All finalists. Oh, Dan DeGata with a big wheel stand, had to get back into it with a little 66 Mustang. I don't know what type of power is up there. Oh, DeGata. Now it's going to try to feed the Mustang. Another victory. Goes right to the top lights. Here comes Wright. Wright's wife moves away from the car, says, come on, let's see what we can do here. All this hard work, will it pay off? Gotta go to court.
Hello everyone, happy Thanksgiving. Like I promised, here it is. Here's my video about the 302 versus 351 strokers. There are advantages. I know a lot of you will say, I'm going to go with a 351. Yes, I agree, for the most part. But let's not just throw away the 302 stroker. There are advantages to that. And I will highlight that, in a few moments. Not everything is basically cubic inch. I know cubic inch is king, but there are instances where I will show you the 347 stroker is superior to a 408 stroke, let's say 66 Mustang or Fox body. That is basically depending on what we're trying to accomplish here. Sometimes it's what we call balance, a balanced package. Because I tell you what, a 408 is not to be laughed at. That's a lot of cubic inches. For a small block with aluminum head that weighs roughly about 450 pounds. That's pretty much what they come up to. With aluminum heads, aluminum intake 351, and then you're looking at 302, roughly about 400 pounds, about 50 pounds less. And there are advantages. I remember years ago, a friend of mine gave me a ride in a 66 or 65 4-speed Mustang, and it took off hard. I go, man, this is the strongest running 302 or 289 that I ever rode in. After he had all the smiles, and I was really blown away with the top loader. You know how fun those cars are. He popped the hood. He had a 351. Right off, as popped the hood, I noticed the carburetor height is up there, almost touching the hood, and then the width of that was a lot wider, closer to shock tower. But to tell you the truth, and when I drove the car, I can't even tell it's got a 351 on the nose. Because you have 55 pounds of added weight, just like when you take off your front mounted battery and throw it on the back. You, on the street, you hardly feel the difference. Now you got a battery mounted, a trunk mounted battery, should I say, and you would hardly feel anything. Handling wise, maybe extreme if you're doing some kind of road racing or pylon racing, you may feel it, but otherwise, just driving on the street, you can't even tell that it's got a 351 or the battery's on the trunk. Hard to tell. Now, what is the difference between the two? When you look at, somebody asked me that question, the length of the 302 and the 351 is exactly the same. That's why you can bolt them together. Same bell housing, same flywheel, they'll bolt up. The timing chain cover is also the same. That said, the distance between the crank center line and the camshaft center line is exactly the same. And you're not going to have any clearance issues with a camshaft, with a rod, or if you stroked it through 3400, okay, or 3480, that's what I've done. In fact, let me just bring this down real quick. The stroke of any engine is based on a 4-inch bore. Okay, that's small blocks. The stroke is your cubic inch. Think about this. The small block Chevy, it's got a 4-inch bore, 3480 stroke, 350. Look at a 351. It's got a 4-inch bore with a 3.5-inch stroke, or 3.5, instead of 3.480 on a Chevy. It's a 351. 302, it's got a 3-inch stroke, 2 inches more, 302 on a 4-inch bore. 289, 287 stroke, 2 inches more, it's a 289 with a 287 stroke. So you gain more displacement stroking an engine instead of boring it out, except you have a motorsport block where you can bore it 125 over, 185 over, okay? But basically, if you bore 150 over, okay, you got about 30 inches of added displacement, give or take 1 or 2 cubic inches more. Okay, a 4125 is 12.5 times 2, basically, 25, 26 inches more. Now you add a 4-inch bore, a 4125 bore to a 4-inch stroke, you end up with a 427 cubic inch. On an 8.2 deck, 3400 is a 340. Then everybody, bores it 30 over, plus 6 or 7, then we call it 347. Okay, 3400, 340 plus, 30 over, 6 inches more, 7, 347. So you get the point. You get a lot more power out of, like we said, torque is king on the street. You're not going to compare a 351 with a 4-inch stroke to a 302 with a 3400. Big difference in power. Okay, torque-wise. Horsepower, the head will be the limiting factor. Seen it. Okay, when you rev that 347 high to its peak, and you rev that 351 or 408 to its peak, guess what? The head is a choke point. That's going to determine what your horsepower is. So basically, a stroke 351 will have a lower peak torque and a lower peak horsepower number. It's going to come in earlier and sign off earlier. With 347, same type of camshaft, it's got to rev a little higher. Because, for any given camshaft, everything being equal, the smaller displacement, stroke-wise, will rev higher. Not necessarily a higher peak number, but on the RPM scale, it'll peak a lot higher than you would with a long stroke engine or a stroker combination. Here's a picture of the crankshaft. When you look at, they're both the same, but they weigh significantly more on the 351. The 347 stroker on the left and a 4175 stroker on the right. It's pretty much very close. Counterweight position, both of them 28 ounce. Here you can see the difference of the 302 347 and 351 4175 stroke on the right. The difference is the weight. Counterweight position, everything else is the same. It's significantly heavier because it's got a lot more metal. Just note on the rear of the seal area, you notice this doesn't have much casting there, and look at here. It's tall. This late style configuration, when you put on the early style two-piece main seal block, you can just remove that. You can machine that off, all right? And it won't compromise the sealability of the new combination. Here, it'll work on any block, even when you put this crank on an early style two-piece seal type block. This one, it'll hit on the new one-piece block or one-piece seal type block. Just machine it off, no problem. And there are many people out there will say, you know what, my 4.8 will always out-torque your 347. I agree, because of the longer arm. You got a tad under 3.5, that's a lever arm, okay? Now you got a 4-inch stroke, that's farther up. Another half an inch or a little bit more, that's a lever, okay? Like a wrench. You have a lot more torque and a lower RPM because you got leverage on that connecting rod and piston on that crankshaft and connecting rod. The distance is your lever arm, and they're significant between a 4-inch stroke and a 3/400. I ran 480, almost 3.5, and I had luck with that. And I run a 2-inch journal on a 347. I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but for now we'll touch on the basics between the two. When you build a 347 and then you build a 408, these two combinations are basically the same. Here we go again. The peak power will be determined by the camshaft compression and of course the cylinder flow. The higher the compression, it comes in a little bit earlier. It'll peak pretty fast compared to a low compression engine on both stroker or 347 or 408. Now, let me tell you this. Again, let me reiterate. A lot of people disagreed with me that I build my engines minimum 10.5, always for between 11.5 with a basic weight hot rod. Fox body, early style Mustang. I'm not gonna tell you to build 11.5 to 1 on a big doggone Montego or Torino, all right? Or a full-on Fairlane. 1970, excuse me, Fairlane, no. Early style, where it's light, like a Fox body. A lot of these resistance to detonation stems from the car weight. Let me give you an example. If I have a 9-to-1 347 and an AC Cobra that weighs 2,300 pounds with the driver in it, it's not gonna detonate. Like I said on a previous video, I met a guy who has 9.5 to 1 on his doggone engine. I said, why? You get a built with 11.5 to 1. Because that engine's not gonna see anything, be it a 3,400, 347 or a 4-inch stroke 351. It's not gonna see the weight, especially if you got 355 gears, sports car gears or whatever, not 273. This doggone combination is never gonna detonate. It's just like you put your V8 on the doggone bathtub. It's so freaking light, it's gonna see the load, but if it's not gonna detonate, be it on the station wagon, yes it would. Things like it's going uphill, okay, because it's got weight to carry. Now, for those that insist that 9.5 to 1, 9 to 1 is maximum on the street, okay, I'm not gonna argue with them. Do it anyway, all right? And I'm pretty doggone close to sure the customer, when he rides in one with a 10.5 or 11.5 to 1, it will impress them. And they'll look at you like, what did you do to my engine? It's a pig. Seen it many times. Now the difference with these two, they will always say that 351 stroker will always leave the line harder or got a lot more torque. I agree. But one thing you got to remember too, because the crank is significantly heavier. When you're revving it up, that crank rotating like that, a lot of inertia, all right, while you're revving it up. And when you drop the clutch, If it's so many pounds heavier, that's inertia, that's power. It's gonna launch the car so much harder. Whereas a lighter crank 347, 400 stroke, it's so much lighter the crank, it's not gonna react the same. Because the 351 so much heavier, there's a lot more inertia as opposed to 400 stroke. When you have both of them spinning and you drop the clutch, let's say bottom of 5500, I'm trying to equalize everything here, 5500 or 6000 RPM, you drop the clutch, guess what? It's gonna react differently. The long stroke and heavier crank, more than anything here, will have so much more significant torque than the small cubic inch, shorter stroke, lighter crankshaft on a 302. I have two cars back then, two guys from Los Angeles, basically street cars. Both of them got them street legal superchargers, whatever that means, okay? Both of them were built equally, both of them 347. They got flat tops, then they got about 10.5, 10.7 compression ratio on both of them. And one decided to put an aluminum flywheel in it. And the other one's got the billet flywheel, aftermarket. Would you believe these two guys would run at Irwindale back then? And they basically ran the same, and both of them had the same billet flywheel. When the other guy switched to an aluminum one, he lost off the start because now he doesn't have the inertia we're talking about here. Smaller crank, now he took off that billet flywheel, it's rotational mass, right, that's being spun. So when you drop the clutch, it wants to keep the RPMs up. Now with the aluminum flywheel, with a lighter crank, and it's got a doggone Romax aluminum, or was it Innovator's West dampener then, as opposed to a fluid dampener. A doggone thing either bog, you go, wow, it drops the clutch, and, and then takes off, or he ends up blazing the tires to keep it from bogging. So now it's revving, spinning, whereas before, his buddy doesn't have an issue. He just go up to 5500 or 52, it don't matter. He just hooks, it doesn't bog down, gone. Imagine if that aluminum flywheel combination didn't even have a supercharger. He'd really fall flat on his face. That's a message for you guys, okay? Just because you have a stroker doesn't mean you're gonna go with an aluminum flywheel. That's road racing stuff. We're not coming up from a dead stop. You're constantly rolling. That's okay. So that's what I'm saying here right now. The rotational mass on the 347 is a lot less than the 351. And somebody told me before, oh yeah, I got a 170 stroke, and I went to aluminum flywheel. Yeah, it didn't hurt me as much. Of course, you got a lot more displacement. You got a lot more available torque compared to a 347. Okay, so the aluminum flywheel didn't hurt you as much as it did these two guys. They were comparing apples to apples. So the message to this is eventually he put back the billet flywheel. So much easier for him to drive. Okay, and then he has always shuddering when he leaves the stoplight with an aluminum flywheel. He wants to bog down or basically stall out. Okay, so watch out with you guys. Just make sure you don't do this thing and end up screwing yourself. Now back to this 302, 301. So now the two have the same crankshaft, both of them forging, but the lighter crank exhibits a lot less torque. Besides, it's got a smaller stroke distance from, you have less torque, and you don't have the centrifugal force from a rotating lighter crankshaft as opposed to 4.8. So there you go. 331. If we would consider a 325 stroke, there you go, 325. Okay, 40 over, 30 over. Now you got a 331 from 325 stroke, 325 is the cubic inches. On the street, I like the 3400 better. I kind of figured it's more tractable, it's torquier, as opposed to 325-inch stroke 331. Okay, so if the car is super light, AC Cobra, you probably could discern between a 3.4 or a 3.25 stroke. Very, very close. But there's a difference when the car's got a little bit of weight. Now, who's stronger, 302 or a 351? We're talking block strength. No doubt the 351. Okay, you're looking at half-inch bolts, 3-inch main. 302, 7/16 bolt, 2.5-inch main. Big difference. What the 351 gave away in lightweight, it made it up for strength. But here we go. I always try to stud the mains on a 347. I prefer that over bolts. And on a 351, I prefer the same thing. Okay? But in order to fasten a windage tray on a 351, I use big block Chevy main stud configured for the windage tray, where you have the threaded section there for the nuts, and then the top has the hookup for a windage tray. So around big block Chevy or Mylodin, ARP main cap bolts. That's what I use on the 351. Now, you torque those to 100, and then the 347, you torque them down to about 70, 75. No more than that. Now, on the head bolts, the 351's running a half-inch. The 302 are running 7/16. Now, let me just stress something here. Please do not drill out your 351, your 302 to 351 head bolt size, which is half-inch. You don't have enough strength on the deck or the factory block. You have more distortion. And I know somebody before that, converted his 351, somebody before converted his 302 to 351 half-inch bolts, and then still torqued it to 75. He didn't do anything. All right? It doesn't help with a half-inch bolt torque. You have to torque it to 100. But the problem here is your deck enough that it won't distort on a 347. So I'd suggest stay with the 7/16s, run head studs. Okay? And same thing with the 351, head studs, especially when you're boosting. Oil system on blocks are the same. If the timing cover is the same, if you look at the oil galleys, you can't tell if you don't look at the deck between a 302 and 351. Same size, everything. The 351 has got a bigger oil pump and a bigger shaft to drive the oil pump. The 302 doesn't have it. Okay? It's got a smaller shaft diameter and a smaller pump. So choose wisely, but if you want to run basically a high volume pump, make sure you have a hardened shaft on both engines. It's amazing how I know somebody and some people run 50, 60 weight oil, and that stock shaft or some aftermarket shaft still twist. Okay? Because it's way too heavy. So you gotta make sure that you run synthetic oil, so it's lighter to turn. It's not gonna bind up that pump drive as easily as you would with a heavyweight oil, as well as synthetic. It's insurance. The 347s or 302 late model blocks, the HO, I won't go past 40 over. It seemed like to me that's just about the maximum. The 351, I've taken them to 60 over. All right? And on some occasions, I took them to 80 to 100 over after I sonic checked the 351s. Some of them actually have thicker cylinder wall. They will take the overbore. And then I cement both blocks to about halfway or a little bit less on the freeze plug area, right there in between or right in the middle, just to shore up the bottom end and keep it rigid. You don't have that much flexing in there. So block cement, especially when you're running E85, it's not going to hurt it at all, cooling wise, because most of the heat is on the top of the block. Heat is concentrated there. If you don't believe me, just look at a motorcycle cylinder head, an air-cooled motorcycle cylinder head. Most of the fins is on the head, and on the cylinder, you see it gradually go down, and by the time at the bottom of the board, there's hardly any fins. But most of the fin is on the cylinder head, and then oh my God, the first half an inch, 2 inches, but that's a smaller motorcycle. Just look at the fins on a motorcycle cylinder. Significantly drops the more lower it is on the board. So basically, they don't need that much cooling at the bottom of the stroke or the cylinder, and same thing with the block, water cooled or not. The 302 can get by with less oil pressure than you would a 351. If you don't feel safe with anything lower than 60 psi on your 351, when you have a 347, 45 is fine. Remember, the diameter of the crank and the diameter of the rods, well, I should say. Now, oil pressure, I won't go over. If people are confident with their 60, 65 pounds of oil pressure on the 351 strokers, you can get by less with a 302 stroker because of the fact that you get a smaller main diameter and they require less oil volume, okay? And like with what I do, some specialized 347, I run a 2-inch Chevy journal, which I cut the bearings because they're a little bit wider when you run a Chevy bearing on a 302, 3400 stroke. And right now, SCED is, I don't know if they're still owned by the original owner because they moved over and basically collabs with or collaborated with Vortex superchargers now, so I wonder if that's a plus. But I used to order my 347 with a 2-inch journal, and they would make no qualms about it. They go, okay, you don't want a 2100? I go, yeah, I want a 2-inch journal, 283, and they do it for me. And when I get my cranks from them, I get a 2-inch journal, okay? And I tell you what, it saves a little bit or makes a little bit more horsepower, especially for high-end builds. You're able to twist them a little bit more. They don't need as much oil pressure as you would with a 351, especially with a 4170 stroke or whatever. You're slinging a lot of crank there, all right? Or 4250, so there you go. I would not be so radical with oil pressure on a 347. If you want, some people insist on 60 psi, okay, fine, do it, all right? But you don't need that much really. For serious builds, you remember this. I run external line on the front lifters, okay? Because they don't have any crossover. The crossover on the back of the 347 and the 351 blocks, it's only on the back. There's no front oil feed. So I put an external line and then on both blocks, okay? It's a must when you have high lift, lots of RPM, 8,000 plus on a 347 or 331, I run an added oil line. And here on the back of the oil galleys, where you have the crossover on the back of the manifold, below it, you have that transition from right bank to the driver's side. I put my caps upside down. The reasoning is if you put it in correctly like they say, the oil gets squashed by that freeze plug before it goes to the other side. I'm trying to help the oiling system as much as possible. If you put that freeze plug upside down, it has a better transition to go to the other side. It's not choked or crimped flow-wise to bring oil to the driver's side, especially at high RPM. Stock-wise, you probably don't need it. This is the basic oiling system on a Windsor Ford. See how it feeds in? There's the main galley. Here's the problem. When you put this thing correctly as the factory says so, it crimps the oil flow there. So I put the freeze plug upside down. All right, so it gives us a lot more room to to go around and flow better. And over here, there's no crossover. A lot of aftermarket blocks get a crossover right about here. So it fades this side. Right now it fades the lifters and then crosses over here and runs out by the time it gets here. Basically there's two sides, since it's on the end of the system, starves for oil. Not good. So
As you can see on this picture, the brass line coming out of the driver's side where the oil pressure sensor goes into, I tap in another line there and go right there towards the China wall beside the distributor and feeds the driver's side and passenger side end of the lifter galley. Keeps it alive, especially for high RPM or lots and lots of lift. Just really need a crossover here real bad. This is how the factory installs and recommends their freeze plug at the crossover oil galley. Take note.
is the galleys there to the other bank. All right? When you put this kind of a freeze plug in there, like so, you're pinching it. You're putting a plug right between the two galley points where they transfer to the other bank. What you did there is you crimped the passage to be restricted more than it already is. So what you gotta do is install it like so. Okay? So that when it come up, it bounces through this side like so and transfer to the other side. Okay, now you look at it installed. You could put JB Weld or epoxy in there and flush it out, and that would be great. And that would be a lot better than this one here. Okay? In direct contradiction with what the factory does, which I don't agree with. Okay? So check this out. Now the oil pan on both engines, I assemble the whole bottom end together. I put the oil pump and I tape up the pickup, whatever it's a rear sump or a front sump. I tape the pickup with some blue painter's tape, and I put clay on it. Then I bolt down the oil pan. And then after I tighten it up, gasket and everything, I lift it up. Then I look at the impression on the clay. How much did it squish it? I would like to see 0.4, a little under half an inch, 400ths. Okay, that to me is the best, because anything higher than that, if your oil level is a little bit low, it could draw in air and really screw up your bearings. But if it's too close, you'll suck the bottom of the pan. So 0.400 clearance between the pickup and the bottom of the pan with clay. All right, so you got to do that. And also on the Fox bodies, 302 and 351, especially on the maximum or Sears build. Always on the front sump where the oil pump sits, because there's a two sump Fox body oil pan. There's about a quart of oil sitting there not doing anything, going along for the ride. I run a braided hose there, straight to the sump on the back. So it's constantly what drops in there and gets recycled back into the system. It's a must-have. All right? Plumb it, whichever way, hard line it, or AN fitting, you gotta drain the front sump. There's 1 quart sitting there, not doing anything. Quart pan, 6 quart pan, 7. It's really 1 quart less, because the front sump is basically robbing the whole circulating oil from the whole system. It's sitting there underneath the oil pump. What it's doing, I don't know. Maybe cooling down the oil pump body.
Here is a picture of the oil pan with that front sump encasing basically the oil pump, because it's mounted on the front. And that's where the quart of oil is really wasted and doing nothing.
Okay, let's proceed on to the oil pan for the stroker engines. It's even more important that when you have a stroker, meaning the crank is basically swinging farther away from the center line of the block, creating more windage. That's a fact. And the longer the throws are, the more it catches oil and slinging them around and creating a lot of really confusion in there, and oil is just being blown and thrown all over the place, hitting the counterweights, hitting the connecting rods, and slowing it down, and it's called windage losses. Now, even if you have a stock pan, I would like to suggest that, well, let me back up real quick. In almost every application, I'd prefer to have an engine with a side kick out on the passenger side for power. Nothing's more effective. I combine that with a baffle on the rail, or the oil pan rail. Baffle with a kick out is the best combination, better than the windage tray. Sometimes I see windage tray go backwards on some engine applications, especially, like I said, with stroker configuration. Look at this picture. There's an oil pan that is stock, and I put a kick out on it. I removed the windage tray on it and put a scraper at the same time. It had much better power at the track again, not on the dyno, because the dyno is stationary. On the track, when the car is accelerating or making a right-hand turn, you have oil thrown all over the place. There are G-forces involved. And when that is taken into consideration, all that oil is being thrown all over the place, the crank is hitting it and creating all sorts of mayhem in there. Again, windage losses. This can be done by a buddy of yours who's good at welding. Take this oil pan stock and kick it out. And before you do this, look at the chassis. The more you can put a pocket there, or a kick out pocket, the better off you're going to be. It's going to be more effective. Therefore, you can do that with basically a dual sump Fox body style oil pan. In fact, one thing that you got to add on to, right in front of that oil pan, where the oil pump sits, oil is caught over there, about a quart. It doesn't do anything but sit there. So, even on stock configuration, you have basically a 5-quart pan on your Fox body. But one is sitting on the oil pump cavity right in front. So now you're really down to 4 quarts. And then if you're even lower on your doggone oil level, wherever you're doing, racing or whatever, and it's happened to be a quart low, half a quart, now you got 4 quarts in circulation or even less, because one is caught in the front. So I put a fitting there on the front of the pan, and the back one, which is the main sump, and I run a braided hose or some kind of plumbing just to keep it drained. Okay? Because that oil there is hot. It sits there with the oil pump, which is hot. It's a heat soak condition, not good for your oil tank, especially when you're racing. So if you can drain that and make that part of the lubrication, circulation, that's even better for your bearings. You get the full benefit of the 5 quarts that you have in there. And you have a 6 or 7 quart aftermarket oil pan. One is sitting there as usual. Some of this aftermarket oil pan, the front sump for the oil pump recess is actually even more so. More oil is caught up in there. So it's really important that you put that little drain to the main sump on the back. And again, I prefer kick-out oil pan, but if you have an oil pan that you already have today, a non-kick-out style, just do the same thing like you see here with a stock oil pan. All right, put a kick-out on it and look at the location of the starter. And if you're running those a gear reduction style starter, which is a tinier or smaller version of what used to come in those 289s, 302s, or 351, the smaller one. Okay, I don't know what year those came in, 91 or 93, something like that, or 94, 95, yeah, I think 94, 95. Use that. then you can kick out that space, that kick out even more so. Because the oil pan is sitting right beside the starter, so you don't have much of a kick out clearance in that regard. But if there's a way you can help it on the other location of the oil pan, the better off you're going to have for power. Extremely important. Take note of that. Okay, let's move on to the next subject. Firing order. Very important. I have seen engines that are making lots of power having the wrong firing order. The 302HO starts with a 1-3, just like the 351 has a 1-3 firing sequence. The 1-5 loads the front main cap big time. If you're on nitrous, boost, or just high compression, every time you have a 1-5 hit, consecutive hit, that front cap, meaning it's only 2-bolt main, and then the crossover oiling hole that goes to the sender, right on top of that main cap stud, all right, on the driver's side. It'll want to pull that and crack all through the threads to the cam, number 1 cam bearing, and up and all through the valley. That's where the the damage starts. Be sure when you run a 1-3, the corresponding firing order on the back is held on by the mass of bell housing, and it's got a lot of meat on the back of the block by the bell housing side, as opposed to the front, where you only have the timing cover and the thin part of the front casting by the timing chain. Not much there. I think it's probably 100 thousandths thick. That said, you will have damage. In fact, let me tell you a story. Yeah, there was one guy at the racetrack who, oh my God, it's just painful to even remember or even recall. He would look at everybody's engine and his recipe, that's why they call him the recipe man, was he would add 30 or maybe 60 thousandths more lift on the intake and exhaust, and then he says, I made your engine more powerful. Of course, but what's the point of diminishing returns? Eventually, he upgraded one of my engines with his recipe, and he put like 60 thousandths more lift. It's already over the top. And by the time the owner realized, he had 1,100 pounds of wide open spring pressure at max lift of 800. Why? Why 1,100? And I said, this is not a big block, this is a small block. And a lot of these cars are running with 5/16s or metric valve stem. They don't even need that much valve spring. Not like if you have a big block Chevy with a thick stem. A whole different story. But anyway, I looked at his recipe. A good friend of mine pointed it out to me. I didn't catch it initially. That when he gained that and he looked at the 1 and 5, you know, he's looking at the firing signal. He goes, "This is not Ben's camshaft. He wouldn't dare build a 1.5 firing order on a racing engine, even though it's a factory block racing engine." Of course, this thing eventually cracked the front main cap in a beefy Sportsman block. It's a 2-bolt main Sportsman block, very stout, and cracked the number 1 main again, and number 2 and number 4. Okay, so it didn't help. That sequence of 1.5 load up the front main cap, and after that, everything, you know, the crank starts twisting on an S. Number 2, the first indication is the number 2 cam bearing slid forward or backward, whatever it might be. But once you see it move, look at that main saddle real close. It's possibly cracked. It's going to start to shift there, and then the cam bearing is going to start moving on number 2 and eventually number 4. So number 4 possibly would crack too, but usually number 2 cracks first. So there it is, you know, top secret engine, I guess, or top secret cam. You know, that's something, you know, when somebody jumps in a combination, not really knowing full well, captures the camshaft and grinding a rotor cam and with a 289 firing order is absolutely nuts. Now when you have a motorsport block, you know, with a 4-bolt main front cap or a 2-bolt main, it's already stout the way it is. It's got a lot more meat on the front. Do the 289 firing order 1.5, it doesn't matter. It's okay, all right? But let me again repeat, there's no support on the factory block on the front. On the back, yes. That's why I had one engine a long time ago where I told the guy, please make sure, it's a road racing engine, make sure you get about a gallon in about, how many seconds did I say? 18 seconds or something like that, a gallon for a road racing engine. And eventually they took that car out to Willow Springs, and it took 1, 2, 3, 4, and only 5 main caps stayed in. And you know what was holding that number 5 main cap? The input shaft on the 4-speed. And then of course the whole support from bell housing down to around that whole area, it's enclosed and there's a lot of meat. Whereas on the front, behind the timing chain, there's hardly anything there. And the worst part, like I said, was that sending unit drilled and threaded into the back of the timing chain coming from the oil sending unit. And it's really weak there, no support. Anyway, so there you go. It's amazing how somebody would do such a stupid mistake, not really knowing, and thought he was improving. I tell you what, I can always go to another guy's engine and look at his camshaft, and I can just, you know, increase the lift 30 thousandths, 60 thousandths more. If it doesn't, airflow doesn't shut off at that point, it's going to be a gain in power. All right, but there's always a point in diminishing return. At this point in time, the doggone stud mounted started giving issues, breaking rocker arms and breaking 7/16 studs. You know, when you're already close to 900 lift, you know, you better have some kind of Gesso shaft mount or T&D. But, you know, this is the recipe that the guy always does. And he talks to everybody and he'll put his secret sauce and add lift on the camshaft. Amazing. But that's another story. Now let's move on. Stroke. What stroke should I put on my 302 and a 351? Now, I know a lot of you have a 347 stroker. And like most of anybody, they'll say, oh, I'm only going to put 9 or 10 pounds, and later on they're up to 15 pounds or more. And then they wonder why their blocks broke. But let me give a little bit of advice. When you have a 3400 stroke on a stock factory block, 2-bolt main, 3400 is just about the maximum. NA, I've put in a 348 stroke, and I cut down the rod diameter to a 2-inch Chevy, and I go through that motion and try to get some more displacement without increasing any more stress, and having the lighter connecting rods and lighter throws helps towards the eventual durability questions that we will end up confronting on any engine with high horsepower. For boosted applications on the street, I prefer the 325 stroke. All right, it's closer, the throw, let's say there's an exaggeration, 4-inch, 3400, right? 325. It's closer to the center of the main bearing. So the overlap between the main and the rod throw is a little closer, so you have a little bit more shoulder strength as far as the crank is concerned. And not only that, it's easier on the bottom end with a shorter stroke, especially if you're boosted. Now, boost, as we say. I ended up years ago, all right, this is 25, 30 years ago, with the same group of guys that we talk about with the light flywheel and all that, and the comparison. There's two guys been on the dyno. Both of them cranked about 570 horsepower on spiked race gas or spiked pump gas. I think they run 104 or 100 octane usually, but anyway, they were running pump gas on that dyno pool. All right, and they ended up making 576 horsepower at the back wheel. How much is that on the flywheel? 576, 676, probably about 700 plus horsepower flywheel. That is stout on a 302. That said, if you add on 150 on top of 676, that's the horsepower you're looking at on the flywheel. That is pretty much the mainstay that I've done, knowing the kind of head I'm going to use with a wedge and the kind of crank at that particular time. It was 3/4. You know, the car's somewhat heavy. They were stripped down Fox body. But here's the key. 576, but once they detonate it one time at the racetrack, let's say it's summer day, or, and I say it happened with my other customers at that day, or at that time, when they end up detonating, if the day is somewhat hot or whatever, they're boosted, no intercooler, of course they're street, they will crack the main caps or split the center of the block. Not surprising. But here's what I want to impart on everybody else. On E85, I have one guy, G. Brown from California. Where is he at? Somewhere around Rosemead or something like that in Los Angeles. He's cranked 645 at the back wheel right now, and it's not even leaning on it hard. What's the difference? 2-bolt main, HO block. He's running E85. E85 isn't as powerful, okay, for the same given amount as racing gasoline, but racing gasoline or gasoline in general has combustion spikes. All right, these combustion spikes are the ones that your engine's gonna feel and see on the main caps and on the block itself, and that's the one that's gonna detonate or bust up your combination. E85, typical with alcohol-based fuel, it's more consistent. You're not going to have combustion spikes. They're not as powerful per pound or for the same amount of fuel you put in there. E85 is more cooler, more consistent burning, no spike whatsoever compared to racing gas or pump gas. So it's a more predictable combustion event, and that keeps the engine alive. 645 horse at the back wheel. Let's just round off to 650. You add 150 on that. How much is it making? About close to 800, right? 650, 750, yeah, about 800 horsepower. Flywheel, no problem. Still runs today, okay? And he's not boosting as high as some of those guys, still making more power. So I'm going to call him later and confirm what boost he was compared to the other guys that were running 14, 15 pounds. And I think he's making more and cutting off at 6,000 RPM with a supercharger. Same thing, same basic combination. But imagine that. The E85 is more forgiving. Fuel instability, fuel spike or combustion spike is the one that's going to do you in. And we know alcohol or alcohol added to fuel makes it more consistent burn, saving your combination. So I suggest if you have E85 available, let's do your build with an E85, boosted factory block. Now, looking at the 351, you heard me on other videos before. I like the 408. There's nothing wrong with them, 4-inch bore. But when I said, and it's true until today, torque is king of the street, I opted for a 4100 and 4170, and it's a big difference. 4250, well, if you got a 4-bolt main, I would do it on the street if you want to hot dog around with a big enough cylinder head. you're going to have quite a bunch of cubic inches. That's a lot of torque, 4,250. All right, stroke, small block. So here you go. You know, it's kind of hard sometimes to try to balance your comments, because some people will take that a little bit further and end up screwing themselves. But if you got some weight, or even a light car with a 4100 or 4170 stroke, you can tell the big difference on a car. I mean, look at a small block Chevy, 348, and some guys are stroking at the 3.6. That's hardly anything. But they go, hey, it really picks up. More responsive, it's got a lot more torque on the street. Yes, but when you have a 3.5 inch stroke instead of 348, now you're at 4 1/4, 4 1/8 stroke, 417 or 4250. That is a big jump. That doggone engine is gonna run like a big block, no doubt. In fact, for you guys who want to run Cleveland heads, closed chamber head, you know, the better castings with a 4-inch stroke, or if you can really get good at it, 4170. I think it's a 4-inch stroke is pretty good on the street. It's gonna run like a big block. There's no more issue about putting what do you call that, epoxy or tongue plates on the intake to shorten the runners and all that. It's gonna fix itself. Displacement fixes a lot of stuff, just like compression fixes a lot of stuff. If your engine bogs down, put displacement in it. If the heads are too big, put displacement on it. It kind of fixes, or not really a band-aid, it's actually going in the right direction. More displacement means more intake volume. It fits perfectly. Okay, for a 408, or you know, I can't say I've done a no, I haven't done a 4170 stroke Cleveland yet. But I think if at all possible, perhaps, probably a one ring layout with a metric 2mm or 3mm or control ring, I think it could be done. But anyway, those things would respond. Okay? So for the street, my choice, 408 is good. I'm not knocking it. I like a 4100, and better yet, 4170. Lightweight or not, 351. 40 over, aftermarket block. We'll talk about this later on coming up. But 4170 stroke, that's 417. Okay? And then when you go 60 over on that block, you add 12 inches to that. Where are you? Quite a bit. 430 something? 435? 432? Okay, but anyway, that's not bad. That's a stout, doggone small block that weighs 450 pounds. You cannot beat torque on the street. Okay, so there's your option. We can do that hardly with a 302. But that said, let me phrase this. I'm not knocking the 8.2 strokers. In fact, let me give you an example. Years ago, I said this in my other video, I had a good buddy, Luke. I did him a AC Cobra, so factory 5 chassis. And when I first did him a 306 at 11.5 to 1, twisted wedge. That doggone thing is quick. Having short stroke, with a 5-speed, it takes off hard. It really books. Then when we went to a 347, using the same head and intake, I told him, so what did you feel there? He goes, now the 306 was more spirited or rev a lot quicker. Now the 347 didn't rev as quick, but it took off hard because of the displacement. Am I correct? I said, yeah, you're correct. It had more torque down low. Okay? It's still manageable when he takes it to a road course. He has a buddy with a 408 bragging about his car. It wasn't a factory 5, it was a super performance. Has a 408. But the builder, instead of giving him 11 to 1 or 10.5 to 1, has him at 9 to 1. So they're at the stoplight one day, and my buddy is with his wife Aya, That is a cute Japanese gal. She plays in one of these bands, or well-known bands. But anyway, they ended up a stoplight in Burbank, and when the green light came down, this guy, his friend, or I don't even know if we call him a friend, whatever, acquaintance, took off, burning rubber. Of course, got a 408 and a doggone 2,400 pound super performance, just like the Factory 5. And a doggone thing, when it hooked up, it didn't have the RPM because it's got a lot of stroke. And I don't know what the camshaft is. And Luke, with his 347 true 11.5 to 1, just boom, went by him. And he thinks his cubic inch is gonna catch up. It was even worse. He just pulled away, gone. The 408 had 9 to 1. It couldn't use the power, has no compression. Okay, so had no compression and don't want to rev as high. Technically or theoretically speaking, a 4-stroke is not going to rev as quickly as a 3,400 or a 325. So in a light chassis, you know, it's adamant and important that you shouldn't have that much displacement. Imagine if you put a big block Chevy or a Ford in a Formula One car. Where's that going to go? Nowhere. It's going to get out of the corner and blow the tires. By the time it gets straightened out on the straightaway, you don't want an RPM. But if you have a short stroke, some of these guys, you know, 4-valve head, what, 2.5 stroke, hardly anything. Big bore, they go to 12,000, 14,000 RPM. They come out of the corner, they stab it and accelerate without burning the tires, and then it's got RPM potential, whereas the big block won't go nowhere. So we got to look at balance here, all right? You put a doggone big block in an AC Cobra, you come out of a road course, Riverside or whatever, not Riverside, that's a long shot down, Willow Springs, you come out of the corner, you stab the gas, you're going to go up in smoke. But somebody with 408 would not be so bad, but somebody with a 3/4 stroke, 347 is going to get in there and get a grip and gone. All right, so just visualize a big block with 750, 800 foot-pounds of torque in a 23-pound car or 2,400-pound car. Or do you have one that's more balanced, just the right amount of arm, and it's got the RPM potential? Okay, big blocks can RPM too, but how? Well, here we go again. Should I close up later? Oh, no. I have run 2 times where my favorite combination is a 9-2 deck for something like that. Okay, so 9-2 deck. Well, should I come in? No, I'll save that for later on. Okay, so let's proceed. I'll touch base on the 9-2 deck when we talk about aftermarket block and stroke in it. All right, and I have a story to tell you about that coming up. Let me reiterate clearly as much as I can. When you build your street engine, minimum 10.5 to 1. Okay, not 9.5, 9 to 1, or 8.5. Stay with the flat top pistons on these 347 strokers. You can hardly do that. It has to have a little bit of dish on a 351 stroker, because a flat top, basically with a 4-inch 408, I think it's like 12.3, 12.4. Can't really do that. It gets worse when you have like a 4.170 or 4.250 stroke. The compression goes up higher. It's best that if you do a dish piston, if we have it custom made, if you have the extra cash, make sure that the dish matches the combustion chamber, so you don't lose none of your quench pad in the process. Okay, and I don't know if I have one picture here of a piston with that kind of configuration. Therefore, anyway, but here's one example here, and I'm going to try to stress it out. I'll try to stress it out for everybody. Like I stated, stay away from 9.5 to 1 combination. Now, this guy here, Roy Estrada, good friend of mine from Pasadena, he had a 302 before with 351 Windsor heads. Small combustion chamber, I think 55, 69 head. And then he's got flat top pistons. It's a basic 302. It ran fast, okay? Eventually, I was so busy, he took it to another shop to build a new 347. He spent his good amount of money. He's not really rolling in dough like most of us. We have a set budget. Anyway, this 347 was done. Later on, when I opened it up, it was a dish layout. And when I first got it to Irwindale, he calls me up, and his friend Irwin said, "Hey Ben, we're disappointed with this 347. Now it's got aluminum heads, and it's just as fast as the old 302 with Windsor heads. It's got DFS heads twisted wedge right now against the 69 or 70 casting with a flat top. Stock 5.0. The 347 didn't go any faster. Again, it's got a little bit of torque, but remember, aluminum heads doesn't hit as strong off the line. All right, the response, because the combustion chamber is a little on the colder side as opposed to a small chambered 302. Now, when you look at his old engine, 55cc, flat top, you're probably pumping about 10, 3, 10 and a half maybe, something like that. But anyways, I know it's above 10 to 1. That given. Now, his doggone new engine, 347, didn't go really any faster than the 302 that he had. It's not even a 306 or 308, 30 or 40 over. So this thing ran. And he took it apart right off the get-go. I don't even think he really broke it in. We tried jetting it and moving the timing around. It just didn't go again. Remember, when you increase the compression, you increase the sensitivity of the engine to respond to any minute changes in it. All right, so anytime you have an engine that you change camshaft big time, it doesn't respond. You change intake, whatever you do, and it basically remains the same. Oh well, that's a compression issue that you're looking at. All right, now, so they brought the engine to me, and right off the get-go, I pulled the heads off. Dish. It was a deep dish, so 9 to 1 maybe at most. Okay, and worst part, it's sitting below deck. I think it's sitting like 20 thousandths down the hole. So now that's another issue. So if we got 8.8, perhaps. So what did I do? I took and put some pistons in it. I had custom made, and the ring pack is up there. Metric, of course, and the other one I think had an inch 16 ring pack. His dish pistons, completely outdated configuration, and put it together with the same camshaft that they recommended, which I have no qualms about. I think it's fairly good. Put it on, and this car has run 1170s. Okay, that's impressive for a convertible, not stripped down. Everything's in it, even the steel hood. So it's not race car per se. It's a genuine street car, classic car of all. All right, so now it's just a matter of making sure the deck is close to zero or at zero. Then I played with the head gasket, ported the heads, the DFS heads. Yeah, there you go, ported, yeah. And now it really woke up because it was bolted together, the heads were stock, and the piston was a dish. So there you go. It's surely it's not gonna put out very well for whatever his expectations were. It didn't work out. Now here you go, Irwin. This is a 306. Again, it's got high compression, steel rods, stock crank. The stock nodular cranks are pretty stout. And I had some steel, was it H-beam? Yeah, H-beam. Kind of heavy, but piston kind of heavy. But it was a budget build. And we geared this up, and it's a race car. It's not a street car. It ran a best of 1067, I think. All right, so it's a consistent 1070 car. NA as well as Roy. So he ran won a bunch of races at Carlsbad and I think Verona also. Yeah, Verona. He's won a bunch of races. Now, a lot of people, he's raced big block, small block, Ford and Chevys alike, and he's beat a lot of them there. I go, what stroker do you have in there? He goes, what stroker? It's a standard 306. People don't believe it. Okay, so like I said, we could not have done that if we had 9-to-1. Okay, and when you look at, I think the compression that's set about 12.7. 12.7 compression ratio on a 306. And I bet you, if you have a 12.7 compression ratio 306 against a 347 with 10-to-1 or worse, 9.5-to-1, you have no chance. All right? No chance at all. But let me just say, put a warning out there. A lot of people will try to build a 347 or a 331 or a 306 and say, oh, I'm going to put 16-to-1 in it. You cannot make it. You will not reach it. All right? Because eventually you don't have enough stroke to compensate to get compression. Okay? Remember, a flat top on a 306 is 9-to-1. Okay, or 302, 9-to-1. A flat top on a 408 is 12.3 to 12.4, depends on the combustion chamber. The same piston, okay, as a flat top. And it is very difficult to gain compression with a small cubic inch engine. Except if you have a Yates 40 or 35cc combustion chamber, you could probably get it. But with a standard inline, whatever is available out there, Brodix, AFR, Edelbrock, whatever head, standard factory configuration, most I could get out of my 331 was 13.87. I remember that. And I had a TFS Hyper. When I tried to mill the head to gain some or smaller combustion chamber, I end up getting the valve closer to the piston. So in the process, when I rotated the engine to check for valve to piston clearance, now it's too close. So guess what? I cut the valve relief off. I lost compression. And so what do? Mill the heads again. You come up with the same problem. So you reach a certain point where it is not possible. And I hear some people say, oh, I got 14.5 or 14.8 on my 306 or my 347. Except you have a Yates, it's going to be a hard thing to accomplish. So when you look at this thing, a 306 high compression, about 12.7, is going to run circles against a 340, 347, or even a small block Ford 351. If it's on 10.5, it's going to be a tough sell. All right, it's not going to make it. So he's beaten many cars, small block and big block, mostly non-stroker and some stroker combination on a Fox body. He's got a first generation Mustang. They can't quite keep up, so they say, oh, he's on a stroker. And we go, okay. Another example, Ruben Kim. This guy has an LX Fox body. And we intended to run that in pure stock NMRA years ago. What I have in it is a piston, custom-made piston, with the ring pack is 125 from the top of the deck at zero deck. The piston ring is sitting at about 125 from the top. Remember, when you build an engine with the ring pack all the way down, 250, 300, sometimes 350, it's like a turbo piston, it's not going to make the power. No. I can't really quite share what camshaft I ran in it, but it's a fairly big hydraulic roller because it was mandated by pure stock NMRA at that point in time, but I had it face 5 degrees forward, all right, from where it was. Because at that duration that it has, there's just no way the computer will see it and run correctly. It'll throw it off. Remember, this is 30 years ago, Okay, and this car's a low 11, high 10 second car on fuel injection with a 500 lift cab. Now, with a flat top, aluminum head, guess what? This doggone thing ran a high 10, flat 11 with 9-to-1 compression. What's important is like the ring pack. We also ran that with a 69 351 Windsor head. Milled down big time. And guess what? The 351 Windsor head took off harder with a 194 intake valve as opposed to the twisted wedge right now that's got a 202. But it faded towards the end. Whereas a twisted wedge didn't quite take off as hard, but it yielded the same ET or a tad quicker. It's just showing you small chamber with a cast iron head has got a lot of heat content. It's able to produce much better response and torque down the low and mid range. Eventually, the small intake valve didn't have quite enough airflow to make that breathe on top end. So when you look at aluminum head, this is why, let me stress, anytime you build a 347 with a 9-to-1 flat top piston, and then if it's even below deck, its compression even drops even worse, and then you have an aluminum head, guess what? The heat content of your engine, or the thermal efficiency of the engine, is basically shot. All you're using is airflow. Hopefully you get to the upper RPM so it'll produce power. But low mid-range is going to be flat. How many times have you ridden on a Mustang 347 Fox body? You got it, you go, this is soft. You didn't really don't go anywhere. Probably got dish pistons. Or if it's got flat top pistons, probably sitting below deck. And it's worse if it's dish and then sitting below deck. So this is what I'm trying to say here. Pay attention to little details. Ruben's car was metric top, metric second, and then a 3mm low tension oil ring. And then the vacuum pump from the factory. We modified that, so we're sucking. We're pulling vacuum on the crankcase. So when you look, it looks like it's got a smog pump. For what? It doesn't care about emissions. Well, guess what? There it is. It was used as a vacuum pump, unbeknown to a lot of people. So again, just like in Irwin's, everybody kept saying, oh, that's a 347. And one day he was arguing with a bunch of guys in the valley. And I said to them, you guys have a shop? You know, take it up, pull the oil pan down. If you see 3Y, which is stock 302, and whatever, 15 grand, 20 grand, if they want to put up the money or shut up, pull the heads off and put a caliper in it and see how far down the piston will go down. It's exactly 3 inches, not 3/400. So at that point in time, they basically shut up. But it's amazing how that was regarded around the valley as one of the fastest street cars. That was a 347. It's got 500 lift with a 9-to-1. But I try to gain as much as I can on the ring pack, minimum crevice losses, head gasket matched the cylinder bore. It's only a 430 over, and the head gasket a 430 over, not 4100. Okay, like some of these Felpro high performance gasket, where the head gasket is actually bigger than the cylinder displacement or cylinder bore, so you have a lot of dead areas there. That acts like an EGR because you can't really evacuate all that exhaust when you have a lot of crevice losses, meaning above the top ring you have a lot of open space. It gets worse sometimes when you taper the top of the piston. Now you created an even bigger crevice loss or crevice area around the circumference of the bore. And then the rods, what was that? I had some kind of I-beam rod that I lightened up, okay, because the stock rod would have come apart. So I think at that time Crowder did make some I-beam. Was it Crowder? And I lightened up the sides of the I-beam, try to cut some more weight, and then we use a 28-ounce counterweight or crankshaft 302 early style. So there you go. That's what we ended up with. So always pay attention to all those little details. Okay?
This was my street car. It weighed 3,080 with me in it. The only thing it's got is fiberglass hood, all steel, all glass, and stock suspended with some traction bar. It was a 60 over block, 351 Windsor, 2-bolt main factory, and a 4170 stroke. It ran a best of 1027 at Bakersfield. That ran a stock crank 400M that was turned down to 2100 Chevy Journal. At that time, there were no 4170 stroke. Really, yeah, there was nothing at that time. Therefore, we had to run a stock crank off a 400 and turn it down. But the car is fast. I usually come up to the line after my burnout, brake torque it to 1300 to 1500, mash the pedal, and off it goes. So the stall speed is 4500, gears on the back is 410, 27 by 8.5 inch Racemaster slicks. As you can see on this picture, it's not that wide of a tire. Through the muffler, it'll run 1020. After that, the crank wouldn't take that much punishment. I had to switch it over, and eventually later on to a 4170 stroke aftermarket. I don't remember what brand we ended up switching it over, but that was years ago. Like I said, I brake torqued the transmission at about 1300 to 1500 and leaning hard on the brake. It's got a 4500 stall converter, and as soon as I let it go, I mash the pedal. It hooks, shift at 6 to 800. That's all, under 7,000 RPM. The camshaft was, I think, 268 at 50 and 740 lift at this particular time with a TFS high port head, 850 annular discharge Venturis. I couldn't leave the line the way I was leaving if I had a standard Holly 850 without an annular discharge. I could really launch it with the annular discharge without surging or basically uh, almost stumbling. The annular discharge was key. That's why I was able to launch pretty quickly against the converter. No trans brake. Actually, we did try a trans brake. It had too much torque for the little uh, slicks up back, which was the M&H 27 by 8 and a half. Oh, no, 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 no. It was 27 by 9 inch slick. Excuse me, correction. And it'll blow the tires. So I opted to um, shift it manually. Okay, so had a C4, reverse valve body. That's all. Very impressive. This is one of my cars. It's John. I forgot his last name. Somewhere from Chino Hills. Anyway, his 1-2 Fun Ford Weekend Street Warrior wins out there in Arizona. It's a 331 with TFS R heads at that time. Later on, we eventually found out the R is much too big. It actually went faster with the first generation twisted wedge cylinder head. Remember, the R head's much, much too big, not for a 331. It's a stretch for a 347. But take heed.
The R showed a lot more flow on this bench, no doubt about it. But guess what? It didn't pan out at the racetrack. 331 is not that big to be running a TFS R head. Even if it was 347 or a little bit more, I think it's still not going to turn out well. This is when they're telling you that, what the flow bench said it's going to be a superior head flow-wise. It didn't pan out as such. Okay, so eventually they ran the standard first gen twisted wedge and made big power. Not bad. All right, this is all steel, just a glass hood, and traction bar on the rear, calibrates from what I can remember, and 2 wins later, it showed.
This is Jameson Suarez, one of the guys that won a bunch of races for me from Carlsbad to Verona, Palmdale, you name it, Sacramento, Bakersfield. Anyway, we ran like a usual all heads up classes like the previous car here. It has a 4 170 stroke and factory block, 60 over only. All right, so that's a 6970 casting. It's got a best of 938 up at Vegas, which is basically high altitude track. And you knock 2 3 tenths off of that on a sea level, it'll probably go 9-0 through the muffler NA. Very impressive. But then again, the weakness of the number one main cap and eventual number two main camshaft bearing start to come off, indicating that the number two main cap or main saddle are cracked. Okay, so this is the limitation of the 2-bolt main block. Otherwise, it ran pretty good. So perhaps mid to low nines is the maximum for a factory 2-bolt main block. This is me in the Kaufman Products race car, 331 cubic inch, TFS high port. It's got a 750 carburetor, double pump, and a C6 transmission back then, sponsored by Art Car, one of the pioneers in the transmission field. Anyway, we won and set the first 10 and 9-second West Coast pass, set low ET top speed on all the events. We were very, very lucky or fortunate to have won so many races with this and set the basically set the pace over here on the West Coast. This car here doesn't really need any kind of introduction. If you're a Mustang guy, this is one of the most famous race cars of that time when this 5.0 revolution started catching on. It is Stormy Norman Grace out of Florida's 5.0 championship winning car. I had the opportunity to work on an engine for this thing, and we were working on the prototype twisted wedge head at that time. It wasn't even called that name. It came about by wildly modifying a high port DFS head and move the valves around, and the ports are different. So here it comes, and later on it was known and called twisted wedge, which is perhaps the most it's a fan favorite. Everybody has it, or just about everybody. I feel it is the dominant head for the street, especially with 347s or stroker 351s. Can't go wrong with them. And there are pictures here of the prototype when we were working on it, and basically, and also the piston. It's a single ring combination, 3/400 stroke. It's very impressive, and it will go close to about, oh my God, 8,800 RPM at that time.
Well, this video has been quite long. It's, because there's so many different versions of 351s and even 8.2 deck. You have the 331, the 347, the 353, 363. We'll touch bases on that in closing this video. Look, the bottom line is you gotta realize between the 347 and the 408 or the 432 or 426, whichever one, depends what stroke crank you end up with a 351. You have a lot more choices. Just remember, it is longer stroke given more torque. But you also got to realize, besides that torque gain, the V8 is 9.5 deck taller. 9.2 for the Cleveland, 9.5 from an 8.2. Basically, when the displacement or the deck height gets bigger, guess what happens? The manifold gets wider. They're still using the same heads, whatever you end up, Cleveland or straight inline. But since it's taller deck, guess what happens? Carburetor right here, or throttle body. It's a longer runner. That also gives you a broader, basically a lower, it gives you stronger low and mid range. Very critical because of the fact that it is spread out and the runners are longer, especially the outside ones. The runners are
1, 5, 8, and 4. That by itself, you have a longer runner on the ends as opposed to the center ones. Not like a small block Chevy, they're closer to each other. It gives you a broader power band. Okay, because the 4 longer runners will hit lower on the RPM scale, and then the shorter runners, which is the middle ones, will give you the top end pull. So it has a better, this way, torque range as opposed to like this where they all peak at the same time. All right, so you're looking at a very good combination there. And from what I can see, 325 stroke to 3400, so it's a 331 versus 340. It's very close. When you're on a light Fox body, I don't think you could really feel the difference. But if the car's got some weight, there you go. It really helps out to have that longer stroke. Now, on a 4100, 4100, 408. On the 408 with a 4-inch stroke, 4100, and then a 4170. I won't really recommend the 4250 unless you really spend all the right connecting rod. I feel that even on 4250, the 6250 is still a tad short. That's why I run 6300. Okay, I just want to push the pin as far and as high as possible to keep that piston from wobbling down when it goes to the bottom of the stroke. So it's very, very important that we do this. We have to cut this a little shorter now. I think I'm over an hour and a half. And I'm getting confused when I'm trying to edit these things. But closing remarks here. A lot of you are asking about, I touch bases on those 377 budget stroker kits from Ford, you know, with the 385 stroke or 377, whatever they are. I haven't really done a lot of those, but to tell you the truth, anytime you increase the stroke from 3.5 or 348 on Chevy to 4-inch or even 3.85 stroke, it's a plus. You're not going to have hardly any negative effects out of that. It's going to be impressive. Remember, I see Chevys just going over to a 383 is already kicking butt. Okay, and when you put a 385 stroke in it, that's a jump. Okay, so nothing wrong with it. It's not going to be a race motor. It's a good street combination, except you configure one with aluminum rods and so forth and so on. But like I said, when your combination is somewhat on the street, torque is king. The more stroke you put in there, the better off you're going to be. 3.85. Now let's go to the 408 or the 4-inch stroke to the 4100 to the 4175. I prefer on the street the 4175. That said, I've ran twice already. Okay, on our stroker engines, 4250 plus stroke. Okay, one was plus stroke, a little over. I think it's like 464, something like that, cubic a small block. And to tell you the truth, it didn't go any faster. On the 8th mile, it'll equal a smaller cubic inch. Or, well, let me put it to you this way. We tested a big inch Windsor past 460 CID. And it didn't last too long. Because, like I've stated on my previous video, with that much stroke, okay, and some of these doggone aftermarket blocks got actually a shorter cylinder or a shorter cylinder length than the aftermarket ones. By God, I don't know what they're thinking, okay, but that said, when they run a 6250 rod, that doggone piston, when it goes down to bottom dead center, is going to wobble out. The skirt shows up, all right? Even though the piston skirt's already short, there's a danger that the piston pin is going to go below the skirt of the cylinder wall. That's a no-no. And I feel this is probably what happened with these two engines. It's going to start to wobble on the bottom. At that point in time too,
this engine's fighting itself. It's got a lot of internal drag from a lot of stroke, a lot of piston speed coming off TDC with a long stroke engine. All right, it parks when it goes around TDC, it yanks it. All right, whereas a shorter stroke combination and a lower deck, let's say a 9.2, we have actually went faster with a 9.2 than we would with a 9.5. That's why on a lot of my stronger running combination, I prefer the 9.2 when RPM is king at the racetrack. On the street, sure, all bets are off. 9.5 with cubic inches, gonna be hard to beat. But once these cars are super, super light, okay, it becomes quite a challenge to run a big cubic incher because the engine just don't want to freely RPM. Okay, that's like the key word, freely RPM. In fact, when we look at the 8th mile time between a short deck Windsor as opposed to a big flowing, big cubic inch Windsor, the 8th mile is comparable. Okay, they're still within, well, neck to neck. But I bet you, when it gets past the 8th mile, these cars are either supercharged, turbocharged, or nitrous. That short stroke combination is going to pull away due to the fact that it's able to freely RPM towards the big end and show you a lot of mile an hour. With Jameson's car, 4170 stroke, that combination went 930 like I stated here, that red car. When we switched to a 4-inch stroke, his RPM went up about 1200, quite a bit, okay? I don't know the exact, but he used to shift at 7200, okay? Or sometimes 6800, depends. It'll run like a 930. Now, it runs much quicker with a 4-inch stroke. Now it's basically shifting at 82 to 8400 with a non-counterweighted crankshaft. So it's telling you right there, it's smaller by 17 inches, roughly about, yeah, 17 inches. Because the stroke for if you're a standard 4-inch bore, 4170 stroke on a 4-inch bore, no overbore, is 417. On a 4-inch bore, 4-inch stroke and 4-inch bore, it's a 400. That's it, okay? We were up about a minimum 1,000 RPM more, utilizing the similar camshaft specs, okay? Duration at 50. So here we are, we're revving freer towards the high RPM. So, you look at a lot of these cars, they make a lot more, especially when they're lighter. Okay, you don't want a torque motor on a light car. It's just not gonna work. All right, you're just gonna sit there and spin, and then as soon as you hook up, you're trying to push it and go past, you red line the tack, and you go, you don't want to go. So here we are. That is the net effect on a 302 base or 8.2 deck. I like the 353s or the 363. The difference is 325 stroke and the other one's 3400. Again, lightweight. If you got a doggone high ports, 4-5 speed Lenco, stiff gears, you keep the RPMs up, I like the shorter 353. If you got some weight, automatic transmission, 3-speed instead of 4 or 5 speed, then I would prefer the 3-400 stroke. Again, you're looking at the details here. I'm sure some 3.4 or 3.6 will outrun a 353. That's a possibility. But then when you're looking at lighter weight, one that's able to rev higher up on the RPM scale, 9,000 plus or more, that doggone short stroke is going to run away from it. No doubt. Let's touch base on, I've seen these things before where they stroke a small block 302 with 2000 cc rods. I think I've seen several of those years ago, and somehow they use stock type 302 pistons with a 2000 cc rod, something like that, 316. I don't recommend it. Okay, Why use a stock rod for a swap? They're weak. Don't waste your time with it. Even with rod bolts, it's just weak. Just go get yourself some aftermarket, even made in China rods are going to be a lot better than the factory rods because the bolt arrangement is different. Even when you put in this doggone ARP rod bolts or SPS rod bolts, the shoulder, the pin is just too weak. All right, so you're better off just getting some H-beam, budget H-beam or I-beams out there. You're gonna be a lot more happier. And when you're at that point, just run 5,400 or 5,500 like I do, and then I cut down the rod journals, 100 thousandths to a 2-inch small block Chevy. There you go. So also, I don't know if I said it on this video, when you have a taller deck engine, this is an 8.2, this is a 9.5. The higher it is, it becomes a longer runner. So you had more torque with a longer stroke 351 than a 302, 3,400 to let's say 4,170. What you also got to look at is now, if everything else being equal, all right, if that's even possible, the longer runner is going to have a broader torque range. We know that. That's why you have all these, sheet metal intake. They look like an offshoot of the old, just like the Chevy TPI of the IROC-Z. I love that manifold. They look real good. And then the Ford manifold, they look real ugly. It's a kick off to the side type of design. Ugly. I like the doggone IROC-Z with the twin, bore throttle body in front. Man, I wish Ford would have done that, but the distributor is going to be on the way. All right, but so, I'm going to do a next video coming up. Some manifold I got from SVO. They shared it with me. I have some people to thank how they did a lot of these. It's way beyond the aluminum GT40 intake manifold. These are trick stuff I'm going to share with everybody. Okay, and hopefully we get a better understanding as well as looking at why they did it. I like to learn and forward to everybody the design, why it did this and why it did that. Okay, just like as a closing comment here, one channel I saw, they did a cylinder head dyno test, several Ford heads, and the one they favored, it's an angle plug, is supposed to, supposed to be superior, and showed up on the dyno, didn't do anything. What was superior was, like I've always stated, the twisted wedge 5.0 head, or Windsor head, TFS, twisted wedge. Now, I will try to break down another video about that as well. Okay, why that canted valve lost its advantage, and the twisted wedge actually even on the street will kick some ass. All right, so I'm just gonna try to highlight what happened there. Hey guys, thank you very much for being patient with me. This has been a long video, and maybe I won't do another one like this because I've been tough. I was supposed to release this Wednesday on Thanksgiving Day. Right now it's Thursday. Thursday? Yeah. Wednesday was supposed to be the day that I was about to release it. And then Thursday was, yesterday was Thanksgiving. And I just did it right now. The day is almost over. So anyway, guys, thank you. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment.